Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty watching the massive alien station grow larger on the main screen. After 3 months of careful communication through deep space transmitters, humanity was finally meeting their first alien civilization face to face. The Zirathi Empire had agreed to diplomatic talks at Harmony Point, a neutral space station they had built specifically for this historic meeting. Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Every decision he made in the next few days could determine whether humanity joined the galactic community as friends or enemies. Behind him, General Lisa Carter and General Ryan Brooks reviewed their tablets one final time, studying everything they knew about Zirathi culture and customs. Distance to docking port 2,000 meters and closing, reported Lieutenant Sam Davis from the navigation console. The Zirathi are transmitting docking clearance codes now. Jake nodded and activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is Admiral Morrison. We are about to dock with Harmony Point Station. This moment will be remembered in human history forever. Remember your training and represent Earth with honor. The docking process went smoothly. As the airlock sealed and atmospheric pressure equalized, Jake straightened his dress uniform and walked toward the exit ramp. General Carter and General Brooks flanked him on either side, their military bearing perfect. Despite the nervousness they all felt inside, the airlock doors opened to reveal the most incredible sight any human had ever witnessed. The Zirathi delegation stood waiting in formation, their crystalline exoskeletons catching and reflecting the station's lighting in brilliant rainbow patterns. They were tall, almost 7 feet in height, with angular faces that seemed carved from living gemstone. Their leader stepped forward with movements that seemed both graceful and threatening. "I am Commander Zeekther of the Zirathi Empire," the alien said through a translation device attached to his chest. His voice was deep and resonated with harmonics that made Jake's bones vibrate slightly. "You are the humans who claim to speak. For your entire species." Jake stepped forward and offered a formal military salute. "I am Admiral Jake Morrison, representing Earth and all human colonies. These are General Lisa Carter and General Ryan Brooks of our military command. We come in peace seeking friendship between our peoples." Commander Zeekther studied them for a long moment, his large, multifaceted eyes reflecting their images dozens of times. "Your reputation precedes you, humans. We have observed your recent battles with the space pirates near the Outer Rim. Your warriors show adequate skill in combat." General Carter stepped forward slightly. "We defend ourselves when necessary, but we prefer peaceful solutions to conflict." The Zirathi commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Peaceful solutions. Yes, we have heard this about humans. You show mercy to defeated enemies instead of claiming proper victory. This is ... curious behavior." Over the next several hours, the two delegations toured Harmony Point Station. The Zirathi had built it as a marvel of engineering, with vast halls and chambers that could accommodate dozens of different alien species. Jake learned that the Zirathi Empire controlled over 40 star systems and had absorbed 12 different alien civilizations through conquest. "Each species we encounter has a choice," Commander Zeekther explained as they walked through a hall decorated with crystalline sculptures. "They can submit to the glory of the Zirathi Empire and find their proper place in our hierarchy, or they can resist and be destroyed. Most choose submission once they understand our power." General Brooks frowned. "What about those who choose to remain independent while maintaining peaceful relations?" Commander Zeekther stopped walking and turned to face the general. "Independence is an illusion. There are only the strong and the weak. The strong rule, the weak serve. This is the natural order of the universe." The formal dinner that evening took place in the station's grand ceremonial hall. Long tables were arranged with both human and Zirathi foods, though the aliens seemed to consume some form of crystalline substance that sparkled as they ate it. The conversation was cordial, but Jake could sense underlying tensions. "Tell us about your military structure," Commander Zeekther requested as the meal progressed. "How do your generals acknowledge the authority of their superiors?" General Carter exchanged a glance with Jake before answering. We have a clear chain of command based on rank and responsibility. Orders flow from superior officers to subordinates. But we also value input and discussion at all levels. Discussion, the Zirathi commander repeated slowly. And what of ritual submission? How do your defeated enemies show proper respect for your victory? We don't require submission rituals, General Brooks replied. When conflicts end, we focus on rebuilding and establishing peaceful relationships. A strange silence fell over the Zirathi delegation. Jake noticed their crystalline faces seemed to shift color slightly, becoming darker. Commander Ziegther set down his eating utensil with deliberate care. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding in our communications, the alien said in a voice that carried new undertones of menace. The Zirathi Empire does not engage in relationships between equals. We had assumed that humans understood the proper order of things. Jake felt alarm bells going off in his mind. Commander Ziegther, humanity seeks mutual respect and cooperation. We believe all intelligent species have value and deserve to determine their own destiny. Mutual respect, the Zirathi leader said, standing slowly to his full, intimidating height. You speak as if humans and Zirathi are equals. This shows either ignorance or deliberate insult. The other Zirathi around the table also stood, their movements coordinated and threatening. Jake realized they had walked into a trap. The Zirathi had never intended this to be a meeting between equals. They had expected humanity to immediately submit to their authority. We mean no insult, Jake said carefully, also rising from his chair. We simply believe that cooperation between independent peoples is more beneficial than domination. Commander Ziegther's crystalline features darkened further. Independent? There is that word again? Very well, humans. If you will not show proper respect through your words, perhaps you will show it through your actions. He gestured toward General Carter and General Brooks. Your military leaders will perform the ritual of submission before the Zirathi delegation. They will kneel and acknowledge the superiority of our empire. General Carter straightened her shoulders. With respect, Commander, we don't kneel to anyone except in remembrance of our fallen comrades. And we certainly don't acknowledge the superiority of any empire over free human beings, General Brooks added firmly. The tension in the room became thick enough to cut. Jake could see Zirathi guards moving into position around the exits. What had started as a diplomatic dinner was rapidly becoming a crisis that could determine the fate of both species. The Zirathi guards moved with deadly precision, their crystalline armor making soft chiming sounds as they surrounded the human delegation. Admiral Jake Morrison felt his hand instinctively move toward his sidearm, but he knew that starting a firefight in the middle of diplomatic talks would doom any chance of peaceful resolution. Commander Ziegther raised one clawed hand and the guard stopped moving. His multifaceted eyes fixed on General Lisa Carter and General Ryan Brooks with unmistakable hostility. The air in the ceremonial hall seemed to vibrate with tension. You refuse to show proper respect to the Zirathi Empire, the alien commander said slowly. This is not merely discourtesy. This is an act of war against our authority. Jake stepped forward, placing himself between the Zirathi and his generals. Commander, there has been a serious misunderstanding here. Human military officers don't perform submission rituals, but that doesn't mean we lack respect for your people. Respect is shown through action, not words, Ziegther replied. His voice carried harmonics that made the walls themselves seem to hum. Your generals have chosen to insult the entire Zirathi Empire in front of our representatives. This cannot be overlooked. General Carter moved to stand beside Jake. We came here in good faith seeking peaceful relations between our peoples. If our customs offend you, we can discuss alternatives that honor both our traditions. There are no alternatives, Ziegther said with finality. You will kneel and acknowledge Zirathi superiority, or you will face the consequences of your defiance. General Brooks stepped forward as well, his jaw set in determination. We don't kneel to tyrants. If that makes us your enemies, so be it. The Zirathi commander's crystalline features shifted to a deeper, more ominous color. He gestured sharply and the guards immediately moved forward, surrounding Carter and Brooks. Their weapons, strange crystalline devices that seemed to pulse. with internal energy were now pointed directly at the two generals. "Wait," Jake said desperately. "Let's discuss this. Surely we can find a diplomatic solution." "The time for discussion has ended," Ziegler announced. "These two have committed an unforgivable offense against the Empire. They will be taken into custody and face trial for their crimes." Jake watched helplessly as the Zirathi guards placed restraining devices on Carter and Brooks. The devices seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as their armor, and they locked around the general's wrists with an ominous humming sound. "This is madness," Jake protested. "They're diplomatic envoys. They have immunity under galactic law." "Galactic law is what the Zirathi Empire says it is," Ziegler replied coldly. "Your generals chose defiance over wisdom. Now they will learn the price of that choice." As the guards escorted Carter and Brooks from the hall, General Carter turned back to look at Jake. "Tell our families we did our duty," she said calmly. "And tell Earth what kind of empire we're dealing with." General Brooks nodded grimly. "Don't let them intimidate humanity, Jake. Stand firm." The next 24 hours were a nightmare of desperate diplomatic efforts. Jake worked frantically with Ambassador Kate Williams, who had arrived on a separate ship to negotiate for the general's release. They sent message after message to the Zirathi High Council, offering everything from trade agreements to technological exchanges. Every offer was rejected. The Zirathi made it clear that only complete human submission to their empire would save the generals' lives. They demanded that Jake himself perform the submission ritual and acknowledge that humanity was now a vassal state of the Zirathi Empire. "I won't trade the freedom of our entire species for 2 lives," Jake told Williams as they sat in his quarters aboard the Liberty. "Lisa and Ryan would never forgive me if I did." Williams nodded sadly. "I know, but there has to be something we can do." Their answer came in the form of a transmission from the Zirathi High Council. Commander Ziegler appeared on the screen in what looked like a vast crystalline chamber. Behind him, Jake could see Carter and Brooks standing in energy restraints, their heads held high despite their circumstances. "Humans of Earth," Ziegler began, his voice carrying throughout both ships, "your representatives have been found guilty of showing disrespect to the Zirathi Empire. The penalty for this crime is death by neural disintegration. The sentence will be carried out in 1 hour and broadcast throughout our empire as an example to other species who might consider defying our authority." Jake felt his blood turn to ice. Neural disintegration was reportedly one of the most horrible ways to die, slowly destroying the victim's mind while leaving them conscious until the very end. The Zirathi considered it the ultimate punishment for those who dishonored their empire. "Please," Jake said into the communication channel, "I'll perform your submission ritual. I'll acknowledge Zirathi authority over humanity. Just spare their lives." "Too late," Ziegler replied with what might have been satisfaction. "The time for a submission was yesterday. Today is the time for consequences." The transmission cut to black. Jake slammed his fist against the communication console in frustration and rage. Around him, the bridge crew stood in stunned silence. Everyone knew what was coming, and everyone felt completely powerless to stop it. Captain Nick Taylor had been conducting reconnaissance missions near Zirathi space for the past month. His ship, the UE's Falcon, was small and fast with advanced stealth capabilities. When he received Jake's desperate message requesting surveillance of Harmony Point Station, he moved his ship into position immediately. Taylor watched through his ship sensors as the Zirathi prepared for the execution. They had constructed a viewing platform in one of the station's larger chambers and invited representatives from several alien species under their control to witness the event. It was clearly meant to be a demonstration of power. When the execution began, Taylor recorded everything. He watched as Carter and Brooks were brought onto the platform, their heads still held high with dignity. The neural disintegration devices were crystalline pillars that generated waves of energy designed to slowly destroy brain function. Carter spoke first, her voice carrying clearly over the communication channels. "We die as free humans representing a free Earth. Our deaths will not be forgotten, and they will not be forgiven." Brooks nodded. "Tell our people that we faced death with honor. Tell them that some things are worth dying for. The Zirathi activated their devices. Taylor forced himself to keep recording as the two generals faced their fate with courage that amazed even their executioners. They never begged, never pleaded, never showed the fear that the Zirathi expected to see. They died as they had lived, with dignity and honor intact, within hours. Taylor's recordings reached Earth. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Citizens who had never seen combat called for war. Politicians who had spent careers promoting peace demanded military action. The families of the executed generals appeared on every news channel, calling for justice. Admiral Morrison returned to Earth with a full report on Zirathi intentions. They weren't interested in peaceful coexistence. They saw humanity as just another species to be conquered and absorbed into their empire. The execution had been their way of showing Earth what happened to those who resisted their authority. President Susan Hayes called an emergency session of Congress. As she walked to the podium to address the nation, she carried with her the final words of two brave generals who had died rather than kneel to tyrants. Their sacrifice would not be in vain. President Susan Hayes stood before the joint session of Congress, her face grim as she prepared to address not just the representatives but the entire world. The recordings from Captain Nick Taylor had been broadcast globally, and the images of Generals Carter and Brooks, facing death with unwavering courage, had stirred something deep in the human spirit. The chamber was packed beyond capacity. Every senator and representative was present, along with military leadership, foreign diplomats, and members of the press. In the gallery above, families of the executed generals sat with quiet dignity, their presence a stark reminder of the price that had already been paid. "My fellow Americans and citizens of Earth," President Hayes began, her voice carrying across the hushed chamber, "we gather today to decide the future of our species. The Zirathi Empire has shown us their true nature through the cold-blooded murder of two of our finest military leaders." Senator Mike Johnson from California rose from his seat. "Madam President, while we all mourn the loss of Generals Carter and Brooks, we must consider the consequences of hasty action. The Zirathi Empire controls 40 star systems. They have technology we don't understand and military capabilities that could overwhelm our defenses." Murmurs of agreement came from several sections of the chamber. Johnson had always been a voice for peaceful solutions, and many respected his position even in these dark circumstances. Senator Elena Rodriguez, from Texas, stood to respond. "Senator Johnson speaks of consequences, but what about the consequences of inaction? The Zirathi have made it clear they view humanity as nothing more than another species to be conquered. Today they executed our generals. Tomorrow they'll demand our surrender." The debate that followed was intense and emotional. Senator Johnson argued that diplomacy still offered hope, that perhaps other alien species within the Zirathi Empire could mediate a peaceful solution. He pointed out that humanity had barely begun to explore space beyond their immediate solar neighborhood, while the Zirathi had been building their empire for centuries. "We're talking about declaring war on a civilization that has conquered dozens of worlds," Johnson said, his voice rising with passion. "How many human lives are we willing to sacrifice for vengeance? How many of our children will die in a war we cannot win?" Senator Rodriguez fired back immediately. "This isn't about vengeance, Mike. This is about survival. The Zirathi don't want to negotiate with us. They want to rule us. Every species that has tried to appease them has ended up as slaves in their empire." Representative Bill Thompson from Ohio stood to speak. "I've reviewed all the intelligence reports from our encounters with the Zirathi. They respect only strength. Every attempt at peaceful negotiation has been seen as weakness. Our generals died because they refused to kneel, and the Zirathi killed them to send a message to the rest of humanity." The gallery erupted as Mark Carter, the husband of General Lisa Carter, stood up. "My wife didn't die so we could debate whether to defend ourselves," he called out, his voice breaking with emotion. "She died because she believed in human dignity and freedom. Are we going to honor that sacrifice, or are we going to kneel to her killers?" President Hayes called for order as the chamber buzzed with heated discussions. She knew that every moment of delay would be seen as weakness by the Zirathi. But she also understood the magnitude of the decision they were making. The debate continued for 6 hours. Representatives shared stories of human courage throughout history. From ancient battles for freedom to the colonization of Mars, they discussed military capabilities, economic impacts, and the moral implications of war versus submission. As the evening wore on, news came that changed everything. Admiral Morrison, who had been monitoring long-range communications, burst into the chamber with urgent information. "Madam President," he said breathlessly, "we've received another transmission from Commander Ziegler." The chamber fell silent as the alien commander's image appeared on the main screen. His crystalline features seemed even more menacing than before, and his voice carried unmistakable arrogance. "Humans of Earth," Ziegler began, "you have now witnessed the fate of those who defy the Zirathi Empire. Your generals chose death over wisdom, and their suffering was broadcast across our territory as a lesson to all who might consider resistance." He paused, seeming to savor the moment before continuing. "The Zirathi Empire hereby claims dominion over the human species. You will surrender control of your 3 outer colonies within 72 hours as tribute for the insult your generals offered to our authority. Failure to comply will result in the complete annihilation of your species." The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. The Zirathi weren't offering terms for peace or negotiation. They were demanding tribute and threatening genocide if humanity refused to submit. Senator Johnson sank into his chair, his face pale. "They're not even pretending to negotiate anymore." Senator Rodriguez stood slowly, her expression hard with determination. "The choice has been made for us. We can surrender our freedom and hope the Zirathi allow us to live as slaves, or we can fight for the right to exist as free human beings." President Hayes looked around the chamber, seeing the same realization dawning on every face. The time for debate had ended. The Zirathi had made their intentions crystal clear, and there was no middle ground left to explore. "The chair will now call for a vote," she announced formally. "All those in favor of authorizing military action against the Zirathi Empire in defense of human freedom and sovereignty." Hands rose throughout the chamber. One by one, representatives who had argued for peace found themselves voting for war. The final count was overwhelming, 432 in favor. Only 18 opposed. President Hayes nodded solemnly. "The United States Congress has authorized the use of military force against the Zirathi Empire. I will now address the people of Earth." The cameras switched to broadcast her words globally. In homes and offices around the world, humans stopped what they were doing to listen to their leader's response to the alien ultimatum. "My fellow human beings," she began, her voice steady and strong. "For generations we have been a species that chooses mercy over vengeance, negotiation over conflict. We have shown compassion to our enemies and extended hands of friendship to those who threatened us. The Zirathi Empire has mistaken this mercy for weakness." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "They executed our generals in cold blood and broadcast their deaths as entertainment. They now demand that we surrender our colonies and submit to their rule. They have given us 72 hours to comply or face extermination." The president's voice grew harder, carrying a tone that reminded listeners of humanity's long history of fighting for freedom. "The Zirathi Empire will learn that mercy is a choice we make from a position of strength, not weakness. They will discover that when humanity is pushed beyond the limits of tolerance, we become something they have never encountered before." She looked directly into the camera, speaking not just to Earth but to any alien species that might be watching. "They executed our generals and showed them no pity. Now they will learn what happens when humanity shows no pity in return." The die had been cast. Admiral Morrison was immediately promoted to Supreme Fleet Commander and given authorization to mobilize every military asset humanity possessed. The largest fleet in human history would soon be assembled, and the galaxy would witness what happened when a peaceful species was forced to choose between freedom and survival. The Zirathi had wanted to see humanity kneel. Instead, they would see humanity rise. Supreme Fleet Commander Jake Morrison stood in the war room at Luna Base, staring at the massive holographic display showing every human ship, station, and military installation across known space. The 72-hour deadline was ticking down, and humanity was transforming itself from a peaceful exploration society into a war machine with frightening efficiency. Colonel Tony Martinez entered the room carrying a stack of tactical reports. His Special Forces units had been working around the clock analyzing every piece of Zirathi technology they could find, including debris from their ships and recordings from the diplomatic meetings. What do we know about their weaknesses? Morrison asked without turning from the display. Martinez set down his reports and activated a smaller holographic projector. The image of a Zirathi warrior appeared, rotating slowly to show the crystalline armor from every angle. Their greatest strength might also be their biggest weakness, sir. That crystalline exoskeleton makes them incredibly tough, but our analysis suggests it might be vulnerable to specific types of attack. Dr. Helen Foster, Earth's leading expert on alien biology, joined them at the table. She had been studying the recordings of Zirathi physiology for weeks, trying to understand how their crystalline bodies functioned. The armor isn't just protective, she explained, pointing to various sections of the hologram. It's actually part of their biology. The crystals grow from their internal structure and seem to be connected to their nervous system. That's why they can change color when they're angry or threatened. Morrison turned to face them both. Are you saying their armor is alive? In a sense, yes, Foster replied. And that gives us an opportunity. Living crystal structures like theirs would be extremely sensitive to certain frequencies of sound and vibration. If we could generate the right harmonic resonance, we might be able to disrupt their armor or even cause it to shatter. Martinez nodded excitedly. We've been thinking about this all wrong. Everyone assumes you need massive firepower to penetrate crystalline armor, but what if you could make the crystals destroy themselves? Morrison felt the first spark of hope he'd experienced since watching the execution recordings. How long would it take to develop weapons based on this theory? Captain LeVar Stone's engineering teams are already working on prototypes, Martinez replied. We should have functional sonic cannons within 48 hours. Across the solar system, humanity's industrial capacity was being converted to military production at an unprecedented pace. Captain Stone stood in the main assembly bay of Ceres Station, watching as civilian mining equipment was rapidly modified into warship components. The asteroid belt's mining platforms were being transformed into weapon manufacturing centers. Status report, she called to Chief Engineer Pete Williams as he supervised the installation of the new sonic cannon prototypes. We've completed 12 units so far, Williams replied, wiping grease from his hands. The power requirements are enormous, but we think we can mount them on our heavier cruisers without compromising ship operations. Stone examined one of the devices. It looked like a massive crystalline cone surrounded by complex harmonic generators. The engineering was elegant in its simplicity, using the Zirathi's own biological nature against them. Have we tested them yet? She asked. Commander Alex Wright is running the first live tests at the Titan facility, Williams answered. We built some mock Zirathi armor using the mineral samples we collected, and if the tests work, we'll know within the hour. At Titan Station, Commander Wright was indeed preparing for the most important weapons test in human history. His team had constructed targets made from crystalline materials that matched the Zirathi samples as closely as possible. The prototype sonic cannon was mounted on a test platform, aimed at the targets from a safe distance. All personnel clear. The testing area, Wright announced over the communication system, initiating sonic cannon test sequence in 10 seconds. The countdown seemed to take forever. Wright knew that if this technology worked, it could level the playing field against the Zirathi Empire. If it failed, humanity would be going to war with conventional weapons against an enemy with superior armor and technology. Test firing in 3, 2, 1, activate. The sonic cannon unleashed a focused beam of harmonic energy that was invisible to the naked eye but registered clearly on their instruments. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the crystalline targets began to vibrate, The vibration grew stronger and stronger until suddenly, with a sound like breaking glass magnified 1,000 times, the entire target array exploded into glittering fragments. Wright stared at the results in amazement. The sonic weapons hadn't just damaged the crystal structures, they had completely destroyed them. If Zirathi armor reacted the same way, the aliens were in for a very unpleasant surprise. "Get me Fleet Command immediately," Wright ordered. "Tell." Then the tests were successful beyond our wildest expectations. Meanwhile, reports were coming in from across human space about other species that had been conquered by the Zirathi Empire. Underground resistance movements on dozens of worlds had somehow learned about the execution of the human generals and were reaching out through hidden communication channels. Admiral Morrison received a priority transmission from a being that identified itself as Veltar of the Kathmori people. The alien appeared on screen as a graceful creature with blue-tinted skin and large, intelligent eyes that held deep sadness. "Humans of Earth," Veltar said in accented but clear English. "We witnessed the murder of your brave leaders. We have lived under Zirathi rule for 37 years, and we know the pain of watching good people die for refusing to surrender their dignity." Morrison leaned forward in his chair. "What can you tell us about Zirathi military capabilities?" "More than you might expect," Veltar replied. "The Kathmori were engineers before the conquest. We built many of their current ships and weapons under forced labor. We know their weaknesses because we designed them." Over the next several hours, Veltar and representatives from 6 other conquered species provided detailed intelligence about Zirathi fleet positions, ship designs, and tactical procedures. They revealed that the Zirathi had grown overconfident after decades of easy victories against species that submitted quickly. "They expect all battles to end with enemy surrender," explained Jaxara, a representative of the Threx people. "Their tactics are designed for intimidation rather than prolonged combat. They have never faced an enemy that refused to give up." Morrison felt pieces of a battle plan beginning to form in his mind. The Zirathi expected humanity to either surrender immediately or put up a brief, hopeless resistance before being crushed. They weren't prepared for an enemy that would fight with the desperate fury of a species facing extinction. Captain Stone reported that sonic cannon production was ahead of schedule. The converted mining vessels were being armed and equipped faster than anyone had thought possible. Civilian shipyards across the solar system were working around the clock to outfit every available vessel for combat. Commander Wright's pilot training programs were producing results that amazed even veteran military instructors. Human pilots were developing new tactics specifically designed to counter Zirathi fighting methods. They called their most devastating attack pattern the Carter Maneuver in honor of the executed General. Dr. Foster's research teams had discovered additional weaknesses in Zirathi biology. Their crystalline nervous systems made them vulnerable to electromagnetic interference, and their reliance on harmonic communication meant that jamming certain frequencies could disrupt their coordination. Colonel Martinez's special forces were practicing boarding actions against mock Zirathi ships. If they could get close enough, small teams armed with portable sonic weapons could disable entire enemy crews without causing catastrophic damage to the vessels. The human fleet was growing larger every day as ships returned from exploration, missions, trade routes, and colonial supply runs. Merchant vessels were being fitted with weapons. Passenger liners were converted to troop transports, and even research ships were given combat capabilities. Morrison stood once again before the holographic display, but now it showed something very different. Instead of scattered civilian ships and defensive installations, he was looking at the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Over 500 ships of various classes were ready for combat, with more joining the fleet every hour. The Zirathi had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. They had used that time to prepare for war instead. In less than 6 hours, the deadline would expire and the aliens would expect to receive humanity's submission. Instead, they would get something no species in their empire had ever given them before. A fight they would never forget. The universe was about to learn that mercy was indeed a choice humans made from strength, not weakness. The Zirathi Empire had made the fatal mistake of assuming that a peaceful species would be an easy conquest. They were about to discover just how wrong they could be. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Zirathi territory like a swarm of angry hornets. Supreme Fleet Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Devastator, watching as 537 human vessels took their positions in perfect formation. The sight would have been impossible just weeks ago, but humanity had accomplished the impossible through sheer determination and fury. "All ships report ready for combat," announced communications officer Lisa Park from her station. "The Zirathi monitoring station at Kepler Station has detected our arrival and is broadcasting warning signals." Morrison nodded grimly. The 72-hour deadline had expired 6 hours ago, and the Zirathi had been expecting either humanity's surrender or complete silence. Instead, they were getting the largest military force ever assembled by their species. "Send them our response," Morrison ordered. The message was simple and direct. It contained only the final words that General Lisa Carter had spoken before her execution. "We die as free humans representing a free Earth. Our deaths will not be forgotten, and they will not be forgiven." The first Zirathi response came within minutes. A fleet of 40 crystalline warships dropped out of hyperspace, their hulls gleaming like deadly jewels in the starlight. They formed their traditional intimidation formation, designed to make enemies surrender before the fighting even began. Commander Ziegler's voice came across all communication channels, filled with the arrogance that had led to this moment. "Foolish humans, you have chosen extinction over wisdom. Your primitive vessels will be crushed like insects beneath the might of the Zirathi Empire." Morrison activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is Fleet Command. Remember our training. Remember why we're here. Today we show the galaxy that humanity bows to no one." The battle began with the Zirathi making their traditional charge, expecting human ships to scatter in terror as so many other species had done. Instead, they flew directly into the most sophisticated trap ever devised by human military minds. Captain Lavra Stone led the first wave of attack ships, her vessel mounted with the new sonic cannons that had been tested just days before. As the Zirathi ships came within range, she gave the order that would change galactic warfare forever. "All units, activate sonic weapons, target their hull sections and fire at will." The invisible beams of harmonic energy struck the Zirathi ships with devastating effect. The crystalline hulls that had protected them against conventional weapons for centuries began to vibrate violently. Within seconds, the vibrations reached critical frequency and the enemy armor started to crack and shatter. The lead Zirathi vessel, a massive battle cruiser that had conquered dozens of worlds, suddenly broke apart as its crystalline structure tore itself to pieces. The ship's destruction was so complete that it looked like a giant gemstone had exploded, scattering glittering fragments across space. Commander Ziegler's shocked voice came across the communications again. "Impossible. Our armor is invincible." "What sorcery is this?" "Not sorcery," Morrison replied calmly. "Just good science and better engineering." The Zirathi formation fell into chaos as more ships succumbed to the sonic weapons. Their crews, protected by the same crystalline exoskeletons as their ships, found themselves writhing in agony as the harmonic frequencies disrupted their nervous systems. Ships that had been perfectly coordinated moments before were now drifting helplessly or firing wildly in all directions. Commander Alex Wright led his fighter squadrons in the second phase of the attack. Human pilots, trained in the new Carter maneuver, swept through the confused Zirathi formation like deadly birds of prey. The maneuver involved coordinated strikes from multiple angles, while broadcasting sonic interference that prevented the aliens from mounting an effective defense. Gold Squadron, execute Carter Maneuver Pattern 7. Wright commanded as his fighters dove toward a damaged Zirathi cruiser. "Remember, we're fighting for Lisa and Ryan." The fighter attack was brutally effective. Zirathi ships that had survived the initial sonic bombardment found themselves unable to coordinate their defenses. Human pilots, motivated by the memory of their executed generals, pressed their attacks with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. Colonel Tony Martinez's Special Forces teams launched from hidden positions throughout the human fleet. Using small assault craft, they approached crippled Zirathi vessels and deployed portable sonic weapons at close range. The boarding actions were swift and decisive, as Zirathi crew members found their crystalline armor turning into a liability rather than protection. Boarding Team Alpha reporting successful capture of enemy cruiser designation X7, Martinez announced over the tactical channel. Enemy crew neutralized with minimal resistance. They can't function when their armor is disrupted. The battle at Kepler Station lasted only 4 hours, but the psychological impact would last forever. Of the 40 Zirathi ships that had responded to humanity's arrival, 37 were either destroyed or captured. The remaining 3 limped away in full retreat, broadcasting desperate calls for reinforcement. Morrison watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The first engagement had exceeded their most optimistic projections. The sonic weapons had proved even more effective than Dr. Helen Foster's research had suggested, and human tactics had completely overwhelmed Zirathi strategy. "Damage report," he requested from his tactical officer. "Minimal losses, sir," came the reply. "We lost 6 fighters and sustained light damage to 12 vessels. No human ships were destroyed." The news spread throughout the fleet and back to Earth within hours. Humanity had not only survived their first encounter with the Zirathi Empire, they had won a decisive victory. The aliens who had seemed invincible just days before had been crushed by superior human ingenuity and determination, but Morrison knew this was only the beginning. The victory at Kepler Station would force the Zirathi to take humanity seriously as a military threat. They would no longer be fighting overconfident aliens who expected easy victory. From now on, they would face the full might of an empire that had conquered 40 star systems. The war spread rapidly as human forces pressed their advantage. Captain Stone's engineering teams worked around the clock to outfit more ships with sonic weapons, while Commander Wright's training programs produced new fighter pilots faster than anyone had thought possible. Intelligence reports from Veltar and the other resistance leaders proved invaluable. The Kethmori provided detailed maps of Zirathi installations, while the Threk shared information about enemy supply lines and communication networks. Species that had been enslaved for decades were finally seeing hope for liberation. The second major battle took place at the Rigel system, where the Zirathi had established a major military base. This time, the aliens were better prepared. They had modified their tactics and deployed experimental weapons designed to counter human sonic technology. The fight was harder and longer than Kepler Station, lasting nearly 12 hours. Zirathi forces had learned to maintain greater distances and use hit-and-run tactics. Instead of their traditional intimidation charges, they had also developed new types of crystalline armor that were more resistant to harmonic disruption, but humanity adapted as well. Wright's pilots developed new variations of the Carter maneuver, while Martinez's special forces perfected techniques for disabling Zirathi ships without destroying them completely. Every captured vessel provided more intelligence and technology that could be turned against the Empire. The turning point came when human forces discovered that Zirathi commanders relied heavily on harmonic communication networks that connected all their ships. Dr. Foster's teams developed jamming technology that could disrupt these networks, leaving enemy fleets blind and uncoordinated. "Enemy command structure is collapsing," reported the tactical officer as human jammers took effect. "Their ships are operating independently now," Morrison smiled grimly. "Then let's show them what happens when they fight humanity ship to ship." The Battle of Rigel ended with another decisive human victory. 2/3 of the Zirathi fleet was destroyed or captured, and the military base was taken intact along with valuable intelligence about Empire operations. Word of the victories spread throughout Zirathi space, carried by the same resistance networks that had helped humanity prepare for war. On conquered worlds across 40 star systems, enslaved species began to believe that liberation might actually be possible. Commander Ziegther, his own flagship damaged and his fleet in retreat, sent increasingly desperate messages to the Zirathi High Council. The humans were not behaving like any enemy the Empire had ever faced. They refused to surrender, showed no fear of death, and seemed to grow stronger with each battle. "Request immediate reinforcement," he transmitted from his damaged command. Center. The humans have weapons we do not understand and tactics that counter all our strategies. This is not the easy conquest we anticipated. But reinforcements were already being redirected from other fronts as the Zirathi realized they faced a threat unlike any in their history. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was fighting an enemy that refused to kneel. The final battle of the war took place in the home system of the Zirathi Empire, where their crystalline homeworld orbited a blue giant star. Supreme Fleet Commander Jake Morrison led the largest human fleet ever assembled into the heart of enemy territory. Knowing that this would be the decisive moment that determined the fate of both civilizations, the Zirathi had gathered every available ship for the defense of their homeworld. Over 800 vessels of various classes formed defensive rings around their planet, their crystalline hulls catching and reflecting the light of their star in brilliant displays of color. It was the most beautiful and deadly sight Morrison had ever witnessed. "All ships report ready for final assault," announced Communications Officer Lisa Park. "Resistance forces throughout the system are standing by to assist." Morrison nodded as he watched the tactical display. Veltar and the other liberation movements had been busy during the past weeks of fighting. Across 12 star systems, enslaved species had risen up against their Zirathi oppressors. While these rebellions couldn't defeat the Empire alone, they had tied down significant enemy forces and provided crucial intelligence. "Open a channel to the Zirathi High Council," Morrison ordered, the main screen activated to show the interior of the great crystalline chamber where Generals Carter and Brooks had been sentenced to death. The same alien leaders who had ordered the execution now faced the consequences of their decision. Commander Ziegther stood among them, his once proud armor cracked and dulled from the battles he had lost. "Zirathi leaders," Morrison began, his voice carrying across space to the assembled council. "Your empire has fallen, your fleets are destroyed, your enslaved worlds are in rebellion. I offer you one final chance to surrender and face trial for your crimes against sapient beings throughout the galaxy." The eldest member of the High Council, an ancient Zirathi whose crystalline features had grown dark with age, stepped forward. "You speak of crimes, human, but we have only followed the natural order. The strong rule, the weak serve. This has been the way of the universe since time began." "The natural order," Morrison replied coldly. "Is that what you called it when you executed our generals for refusing to kneel? When you murdered two people who came to you in peace, seeking friendship between our species?" "They chose defiance over wisdom," Ziegther interjected. "Their deaths were necessary to maintain order." Morrison felt the familiar surge of anger that had driven humanity to this moment. "Order, you call the systematic enslavement of entire civilizations order. You call the murder of diplomats order. Today you will learn what humans call order." The communication ended and Morrison turned to address his fleet. "All units, commence final assault. Target military installations only. Give the civilian population every opportunity to evacuate." Even in the fury of war, humanity showed the mercy that the Zirathi had never understood. Human ships broadcast evacuation warnings in dozens of languages, allowing non-combatants to flee the coming battle. Civilian transport vessels were allowed to leave the system unmolested, carrying refugees to safety among the liberated worlds. Captain LeVar Stone led the first wave of attack ships against the outer defensive ring. The sonic weapons that had proven so devastating in previous battles were now refined to near perfection. Zirathi vessels that had once seemed invincible shattered like glass sculptures under the harmonic assault. "Primary defensive ring is collapsing," Stone reported as another enemy battleship broke apart in a shower of crystalline fragments. "Moving to engage the second ring." Commander Alex Wright's fighter squadrons swept through the gaps in the Zirathi defenses, their pilots executing the Carter maneuver with lethal precision. The tactic had been refined through weeks of combat, and human pilots now moved with a coordination that the enemy could never match. Gold Squadron engaging enemy cruiser formation, Wright announced as his fighters dove toward their targets. Remember what we're fighting for, Lisa and Ryan are watching. The battle raged for 18 hours as human forces methodically dismantled the Zirathi defenses. Each enemy ship destroyed brought them closer to the moment of final victory, but Morrison knew the real test was still ahead. The Zirathi leadership would not surrender easily, and desperate enemies were often the most dangerous. Colonel Tony Martinez led the final assault on the High Council chambers. His special forces teams had perfected their boarding techniques during months of combat, and they moved through the crystalline corridors of the enemy stronghold with deadly efficiency. Resistance is minimal, Martinez reported as his teams advanced. It seems most of the defenders have abandoned their posts. They found the High Council assembled in the same chamber where the human generals had been executed. The irony was not lost on any of the human soldiers who entered that hall. Commander Ziegther and his fellow leaders stood in the center of the room, their crystalline armor dimmed and their multifaceted eyes reflecting defeat. "Commander Ziegther," Martinez said formally, "you are under arrest for war crimes against humanity and other sapient species. You will be given the trial that you denied our generals." The Zirathi commander raised his head with what remained of his former arrogance. "You cannot judge us, humans. We are the rightful rulers of this galaxy. We have brought order to chaos and strength to weakness." "You brought slavery and death," Martinez replied. "But that ends today." The trial that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from dozens of liberated species gathered on a neutral world to serve as judges and witnesses. The evidence of Zirathi crimes was overwhelming, documented by centuries of oppression and the testimonies of countless victims. Veltar of the Kethmori spoke for all the enslaved peoples when he addressed the tribunal. "For generations we believed that freedom was impossible. The Zirathi seemed too powerful, too ruthless to be defeated. Then we witnessed the courage of two human generals who chose death over submission, and we remembered what it meant to be free." The trial lasted 3 weeks. When it ended, Commander Ziegther and the other Zirathi leaders were sentenced to the same fate they had imposed on Generals Carter and Brooks, death by neural disintegration. The sentence would be carried out publicly, broadcast throughout the former empire as a message that justice had finally come to the galaxy. Morrison stood in the execution chamber as the Zirathi leaders were brought forward. Ziegther, his crystalline features now completely colorless, looked up at the human admiral with what might have been respect or simply resignation. "You have won, human," the alien said quietly, "but victory will change you. Power corrupts even the most noble intentions." "Perhaps," Morrison replied, "but we'll face that challenge when it comes. Today is about justice for the innocent people you murdered and enslaved." The neural disintegration devices were activated, the same type that had killed Carter and Brooks months earlier. As the Zirathi leaders faced their fate, Morrison repeated the words that President Susan Hayes had spoken to the world. "You showed our generals no pity. You offered them no mercy. You executed them like criminals for refusing to surrender their dignity. Today you learn what happens when humanity shows no pity in return." The executions were broadcast throughout the galaxy, just as the Zirathi had broadcast their murder of the human generals. But this time, the message was different. Species across dozens of star systems watched as justice was finally served to their former oppressors. In the aftermath of victory, humanity faced the enormous task of rebuilding a galaxy that had been shaped by centuries of oppression. The Zirathi Empire dissolved completely, its former territories becoming independent worlds or joining the new galactic coalition that humanity helped establish. Monuments to generals Lisa Carter and Ryan Brooks were erected on dozens of worlds, reminding all species of the courage it had taken to stand against tyranny. Their sacrifice had ignited a war that freed billions of sentient beings and established humanity as a major power in galactic affairs. Morrison returned to Earth as a hero, But he knew that the real heroes were the two generals who had chosen death over submission. Their courage in the face of execution had shown the galaxy that some principles were worth dying for, and their deaths had ultimately led to freedom for countless others. The Zirathi homeworld was transformed into a memorial center where beings from across the galaxy could learn about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of standing up to oppression. The crystalline structures that had once housed the High Council became museums dedicated to the memory of all those who had suffered under the Empire's rule. Years later, when young humans asked about the war, they were told the story of two generals who faced death with dignity and honor. They learned that mercy was not weakness, but a choice made from strength. And they understood that while humanity preferred peace, they would always be ready to fight for freedom. When that choice was taken away, the galaxy had learned that humanity was indeed capable of mercy, compassion, and forgiveness, but it had also learned that when humans were pushed beyond the limits of tolerance, they became something that no enemy could withstand. The Zirathi Empire had discovered this truth too late, and their civilization paid the ultimate price for their arrogance and cruelty.